the designs for PIAC and for PISA share some common characteristics. The first thing is that you have to be able to establish the comparability of inferences across countries and across assessments. Well, that's true in paper as well. So if you go back to the very beginning of the adult assessments or to PISA, one of the design criteria is comparability. I mean, you cannot rank countries or you cannot talk about how countries rank unless you can demonstrate that they are on a same metric. And that's not so simple to do. If I'm using one kind of a measurement device in my country and you're using a different measurement device, for us to compare each other really doesn't make sense. It's apples and oranges. So you have to be on the same metric, and that means statistically you have to meet certain criteria. That's hard enough to do within a cycle or within a single assessment. But if you're now going to look at trend data like you do in PISA and like countries who participated in IALS and PIAC, they want to be able to look back as well as at the present distribution. You also have to be able to link across assessments. And now we've added yet another design criteria for PIAC and for PISA, is that if you're going to have computers being the primary mode of delivery, we know that all adults can't use computers, and we know that not all countries will use computers. So you also have to be able to offer a paper-based assessment, and you want to be able to compare people across the two. So now you have to link across modes. So the designs have to be such that you can have comparability across countries within a cycle, over time, or across cycles, and now across modes. That's a lot of burden for psychometricians and statisticians. It, by its very nature, increases the complexity of all the designs that get put in place. As I said, they also have to be able to handle new item types. So people at ETS have gone crazy in the last 6 months trying to figure out what collaborative problem solving is and how it could be measured on a computer. And as anyone who's working on PISA will tell you, it's been an interesting debate with the expert group as well as with the PGB and the NPMs. But it's important that we always push forward. You know, this goes back to the point that I was making earlier, that it's not the methodologists or the content people who are driving the change. It's really the policymakers who want to answer more complex questions and want to challenge. And so people like myself who are crazy enough to say, all right, well, we'll try that. So we'll put together a proposal to see if we can do that. And that's really how progress, I think, takes place. It takes place both on the measurement side as well as on the methodological side, because you're trying always to answer more complex kinds of questions. I think another challenge in these designs, and one of the best outcomes is going to be that you can reduce error. You can reduce random error, and you can reduce systematic error or bias through these more complex designs. I think we're starting to introduce more automated scoring into these assessments. In PIAC, everything was done automated scoring on the computer. There was no human scoring on the computer. It was only done on the paper and pencil. We'd like to increase the amount of automated scoring in PISA for reasons we were talking about earlier. You know, no matter how good human scoring is, it's never perfect. And it's hard to get 100% reliability within a country, never going to get it across countries. So as far away from one as you are, that's the amount of error you're introducing. And you hope that all the error is random, because any systematic error that's introduced into scoring is bias. And the problem with bias is you can't statistically disentangle it, and you don't know in which direction it is. So you never want to have too much systematic error in any kind of assessment. And you can also, we found in PIAC, you can start through the computer, capture timing, and you can use timing as part of the process information that lets you to better distinguish between not reached and omitted items. So that reduces measurement error as well. And you can introduce adaptive testing. So what I'm going to do now is sort of talk to you a little bit about PIAC and then a little bit about PISA, and talk to you about the design and how the designs were really set up to try to address these questions. Okay? So those of you who might have worked on PIAC, this is the main assessment design. If you just stare at it, it's kind of like a test. You get a headache. But if you think about the design criteria of having to have comparability over time, across countries and across modes, this is the design for the main survey. You can see a lot of things are here. One is it deals with the complexity of paper and pencil and computer. It allows you to integrate both in the single design. It introduced new constructs. One is the PS and TRE that you see over to the right. And we also did reading components for people at the lower end of the scale. So we were able to measure things that we never measured before. So just so you see, it starts with the BQ. What we did was use some information from the BQ to route people. Because we figured not all adults, when you go to someone's household, either would be comfortable taking the test on the computer or would have computer experience. So we needed to give them an alternative. So you can see we could use the BQ information. People would say they had no experience with the computer. They've never turned it on. They're uncomfortable with it. They don't use it. They would automatically be routed to the paper and pencil side. The people with computer experience would go down the computer side. So let's stay on this side for a moment. You can see if you had no computer experience, you would take what we call a core. The core would be to give you an estimate of your literacy and numeracy skills. If they were too low, we didn't want to frustrate people and give them an hour test. So they would just come straight down to the components if they failed the core. Otherwise, they would be randomly assigned to either the literacy or numeracy. You can see the red lines represent random assignment. So all the workflow, one of the nice things about the computer is all the workflow was done on the computer. The interviewer didn't have to do much other than the BQ. So even on the paper side, it told them which booklet to give the person. It had the items that they were working on the computer so they could follow along. And everything was done in a pretty straightforward way. If you go over to the right side, you can see that they first had to take what we called a stage 1 ICT core. And then they had to look at simple ICT tasks, the kinds of things they would have to do to respond to the different kinds of items. If they failed that, it would be like they had no experience and they would be over here. If they passed the ICT core, then they would take a core that was equivalent to this, only it was on the computer. If they failed that, just like if they failed here, they'd come over to the components. If they passed that, they would be randomly assigned to either literacy, numeracy, or problem solving. If you see in here, the literacy and numeracy uses adaptive testing. There's a stage 1 and stage 2. So you have to choose if you're going to do adaptive testing between individual item adaptation or what we call multi-stage adaptive testing. For the large-scale assessments, and even for individual testing, they now believe that multi-stage testing is better because you don't have to rely on individual items to carry so much of the decision points about where you go next. So multi-stage adaptive testing is you put together a set of items that have overlapping range of abilities. So you could think of them as low, medium, and high, where low and medium overlap and medium and high overlap. And so what happens is you take information from the BQ and the cores, and then you decide which stage 1 testlet an individual gets. Because you can do automated scoring, you automatically score and calibrate that person's estimate of ability based on the background and the cognitive information you have. And then the computer determines which of the testlets, based on the model, which of the second stage 2 testlets they would get. Right? So this adds efficiency because you're giving the items closer to the individual's level of ability. So you get better measurement, so that reduces the measurement error. And all this is done inside the computer. So the interviewer and the respondent have no idea that this is happening. They have no idea their information is being captured and scored. What they see when they hit a button is they just see the next item on the screen. They don't know anything about what's going on underneath. So what we find is the computers don't make errors. As long as the software is working correctly, the quality of the data, the people that route it to the right place works 100% of the time. You don't get any human error. The computer captures all the data, the timing data, the process information, right, wrong, and exports it out at the end of the interview. So this is a much more efficient way to go. In the field study, we had a very similar design. We had more booklets, but we randomly assigned people to paper and pencil and computer. And the reason we did that is so that we could make sure that these items, these 20 items also appeared on the computer. So we had a subset of the computer items being identical to the paper and pencil items. If you give them to a randomly equivalent sample of people, you can see whether or not those items are functioning exactly the same. So that becomes really important, and that's how we establish whether or not there was a mode effect. So, so this workflow really supports the goals of the assessment design. It allows the statisticians and the psychometricians to look at all of the issues that are important in a study like PIAC and will be important in the 2015 cycle of PISA. And so let me show you a little bit of the data from the PIAC main survey so you can see that the workflow worked the way it was designed to work.